So, you're thinking about buying a Perentie. Well, let's see if we can brave the wind long enough to have a chat about them. I own two Perenties. I own a 4x4 general service and I own a 6x6 ambulance. Rather, my wife owns this one. But in any case, I still get to drive it like a chauffeur. I've also got a number 5 trailer that's spent a bit of time with me as well. And some other hardware that we've covered in other videos. So, I've owned the 4B for over 10 years, and it's got the same Isuzu diesel in them, the 4-cylinder, that both vehicles have got. The difference is the 6-wheel drive has a turbo and power steering. This doesn't. However, they don't feel a lot different in the steering because the ambulance is considerably heavier. This is a custom dash. Vic roads often don't like the blackout switches. A lot of people have to rip them out. These vehicles were wired by Lucas, which is why things happen just in a mysterious way in here. The old adage, Lucas, Prince of Darkness, definitely applies to these vehicles. The reason why I never bother putting my fuse box cover back on. I'm in here quite often. The other thing about the electrics, the battery for the 4x4s is under the passenger seat. The fuel tank is under the driver's seat. Now, in terms of transfer case, I've been asked that specific question. This little sticker that's on the front here, you can find that in the RPS manuals. But it basically tells you need to stop to change from high range to low range. And normally, I like to stick my foot on the clutch with this in neutral and go neutral and the low range. And as I'm letting off and taking off in gear, I'll put this in gear and I'll hold just a little bit of pressure on here as I ease the clutch up. Because sometimes it hasn't quite seated in gear properly and it just needs to pop back in. So same thing here, we go to neutral, go back, sticker in first, hold a little bit of pressure on and ease off. That's one thing I have learned. In terms of your center diff lock, this is an air operated actuator. This can go a little funky. If your brakes aren't working quite right, you might have lost some vacuum, and the indicator for that is if your center diff lock is not working properly. So leave that in. Generally, unless you're on soft ground, do not engage that. You will bust axles or worse. Basically, I call it the axle braking knob. So unless I'm really anticipating wheel slip, I generally won't engage that. And for the most part, I find I don't need it with these. Now, some of the primary difference between the 4-wheel drive and the 6-wheel drive. The 4B, you can take the door tops off. Basically doesn't have door skins, and it does have a map pocket. And the door hinges and all that work a little differently. You can fold the windscreen down in the 4Bs. You can't in most of the 6Bs unless you've got like the RFSV versions. Now the hitch on the back, I swapped for a pintle ball on the 4B, just so I can take toe ball stuff, but you do need to come up a bit. A lot of people put droppers on there. That's a problem for your local engineering company. They use a 12-pin NATO trailer plug. However, if you can be bothered digging around up under here, you can parallel yourself in a 7-pin flat or whatever you want from there. General service models have a tailgate. The fitted for radio or the FFRs don't. This confuses a lot of people. I've got a sugar scoop on the side. This is an antenna mount. I custom added this, even though it's a general service one that normally wouldn't have them. Over to the 6B. This one has the PTO driven winch. This is a little bit of work to maintain, but I wouldn't be without it. Way better than electric winch. As long as your engine's running, you've pretty much got infinite winching power. To the hood of the 6B, you'll find the batteries hiding out in here, and it's also windy. That's because there's a fuel tank under both seats. It has 2 fuel tanks. You switch between them with a switch in the dash. Airbox is backwards because the turbo puts some air over to the intake. Brake booster is also bigger. Here is your power steering reservoir. Your power steering box is hidden under the battery. It makes steering adjustments much more of a pain in the rear end, but it can be done. This one, being an ambulance variant, had an air conditioner compressor, now removed. We did reinstate, which was missing when I got here, the old 24 volt alternator. This is a fixed stator alternator, no brushes in it. Actually pretty reliable when you don't have a wiring fault and the regulator doesn't die. But I managed to fix that. I've been asked for a look inside the cab. Excuse the bomb sight that is the interior of this. Now, some things I removed. Ashtray came out and I put a voltmeter in here for both the 12 and 24 volt systems. Some of these will just be a 12 volt starting, like the general service variants, but most of them that have an auxiliary pod on the back will have a 24 volt system. This is a custom edition. However, the lighter socket here is the difference between the 4B and the 6B. That's a factory fitted option. Center diff lock still here. This is your left-right tank. This is your air conditioning fan. It is a 2-stage switch. You have your same gearbox and transfer case, with an exception of a cable-operated PTO output for the PTO winch. The wiring in these is the same grade of Lucas messed up as it is with a 4B, so I don't bother putting the cover back on the switchboard. I may need ready access to that. This little button here is because somewhere along the lines I've got an ignition wire fault. I haven't figured out how to fix it yet. So that just goes from the lighter socket over to the start solenoid, so I can just push a button and turn it over whenever I need. The stickers always fall off the dash to tell me which is hot and cold, so I've stuck a couple back on there and since found a replacement sticker. I'll get around to fixing that later. Radio was never here, I've just stuck that on. Being an ambulance variant, we have the siren control box. Siren obviously removed to keep Vic Roads happy, and I put orange lights on there. Reverse camera, this is a Gator brand rear view replacement mirror, and I had to add a rear view mirror because I didn't have one, but anyway, that just straps on the front. We run a cable over the back and out through everything in a really dodgy fashion, and we shut it in the back door. At some point in the next 5 or 6 years I'll figure out how to do that properly. Also, this is on Club Reg, so I put my stickers in here. Tell me to fill out the logbook. I also let me know how high I am. I've actually got to remember that I'm a bit higher than this. I've added an air conditioner now. However, it did originally have an air conditioner, but it was recessed in. I've made a modification, you can see in one of my other videos about that. This tells you about turbo cool down, generally fairly useful to know. And also, yeah, don't drive on the roads with your center diff lock on, you will break axles. Definitely important. Now about that, when you engage the center diff lock here, it does two things. It doesn't just lock the center diff lock, it also engages another PTO drive, and that drives a shaft that goes up and over the rear axle via a double cardan joint, and that drives the third axle, giving you 6-wheel drive. We'll have a look at that. Now we are hiding out in the windy area below. We can see a couple of things here. This is a tactical light that was designed to reflect off the diff in low light conditions. But over here we see that third axle hooking up over the top of everything. Not really the way I would design it, but then again, when they have this load sharing suspension here, the diff centers don't always stay aligned, so it sort of makes sense. That and the gearboxes had a PTO option already for various purposes. The older Land Rovers would drive a bunch of accessories on the back of the 4-wheel drives, and these are basically a modified variant of the 4B. So, the double cardan joint, make sure two things: keep that bearing in good nick and keep that double cardan joint greased. If you don't do either of those things, you're going to have a bad day. And I think there's some pictures getting around somewhere of somebody very recently where that dropped off, hit the road and pretty much destroyed that gearbox. Another difference with the 6B, when it comes to the trailer plug. So, here's your 12-pin NATO plug here, but it runs across, and hiding under here, just in this little socket in here, is a 7-pin round. So I made myself an adapter, which has caused me some issues, and I've got it hanging down here just to make it easier to see. I can plug into that, into here, and then off to my 7-pin, and this goes to the rear door up the top, and the back of this goes over to the trailer socket. So it's pretty easy to make a plug-in adapter for that. In terms of the trailer hitch, I've got the standard pintle hitch in here, and we've got the rotating bit I've locked on this for a couple of different reasons. Now, in a normal situation, if you're towing something with a fixed pintle hitch, you absolutely want that to spin. You wouldn't do what I'm doing. So in the case of towing with a 4B, my hitch doesn't spin, so I've got a spinning lunette ring with override brakes. In regards to the number 5 trailer, it's a relatively easy mod to make these spin again. Remember to hit up the grease nipples regularly. In terms of your fuel caps, there is a tank on either side. There isn't an internal transfer pump, so you have to fill tanks on either side. Now, in regards to the pintle hitches spinning, this is a bit of a point of contention that I've had varying different degrees of information on. Some people tell me that I should have both spinning and I'll have problems off-road if I don't. Other people are telling me that if they would usually lock one side or the other so that the full load doesn't end up sitting on the hasp, or the locking arm on the hitch, because they could break it and come off. And there's a whole bunch of different people that all have different opinions on it. So generally, unless I'm doing something really hardcore, I leave the hitch locked and I have my lunettes always spin. And I find that seems to be relatively high level of articulation. But generally, if I'm doing really, really hardcore stuff, I'm generally not towing a trailer. I'm generally just taking the 4B on its own. That gets me down all the narrow tracks and no worries. The 6B is bigger, heavier, and a little bit wider by about 2 inches or so. Does make a difference on some of those tracks. Now, of course, keep in mind there are a bunch of different variants of these. My experience is limited to the 2 that I have, and bumping around a few of them in the reserves back in 2004. So still, either way, I left the reserves saying I'd never drive another Land Rover. Clearly they grow on you. So one thing to remember, if you're going to get one of these things, firstly, you're going to be fixing it. Just flat out, there will be things to fix. It's a second-hand vehicle. It's been used by the military, and yes, it's been military serviced, but it's also been military abused. I can tell you some of the things we used to do with them, and how I first learnt to change Land Rover headlights. But in any case, you're going to need to fix it. You're going to have to look at a few other things. Different states have different complaints about things like, I got lucky enough in that the people doing my Vic Roads inspections didn't complain about the bonnet holders. And also when I come to dealing with a vehicle club to get this under club registration. This thing's on full registration, and I have to get it checked up from time to time and make sure things are still valid. Also, the canvas is a cost with this one. A lot of people try and get them and convert them to hard tops. And the canvas, I think my last one lasted about 9.5 years, and it was still in reasonable condition when I traded it off for another one. New canvas from Robco was about 26 or 2,800 bucks. So you got to keep that in mind. The 4B's not so much of a problem. The 6B's. This has a hatch on the roof which I can't open because there's a roof box. Most of them don't have that. It's really only the ambulance variants. These things do leak around the side. Also, when they put the roof on, they put it on with basically a big plate that sticks down. Let's have a look at that. Up here you might be able to see, they put the roof on. I've sealed it up with a bit of spray silicone. They used open rivets, not blind rivets. So the water dripping off here goes in here and leaks through and ends up underneath this and leaks in here. I've seen some horror stories where there are big rust holes around these too, which is why at some point I need to pull the lining off and check for any rust in here as well. Back to the previously mentioned differences about the doors. These have a window winder, which in my case occasionally gets stuck, and they have door skins and no map pocket. So in this case I do have to pull these off and check out what's going on here, and previous owners to this one have put a random assortment of different screws and clips in things. It's hard to know. Dash is a little easier to get open in this and work on. Either case, they are usually just a, what's a good word? The wiring loom in here is somewhat akin to the state of US politics right now. It's a complete and utter mess. And the moment you touch anything, weird, strange things you never expected are going to go wrong. Now, when I got this, it didn't have a middle seat in here. The 6Bs have got room because they're a bit wider for a full-size middle seat. And I left the rifle holders in here. Jumping back to the 4B for a bit, the dash here is never quite right. I have to slap this to get things right. I hit some corrugations the other day and the speedo twisted. Going back to the seat idea, I had to remove the rifle holders in here to fit a half-size 110 Defender middle seat in here. And then I had to put a big plate over it, and I had to get an auto engineer to sign off on that too. Fortunately though, I did keep my stretcher clamps in here, so in amongst all the junk in here, I do have a Belgian stretcher clamped down on the top. Makes for easy snoozing. Also, this little arrangement here is not standard. I printed that many years ago on a 3D printer. That replaces the ashtray. And all of this stuff is running off the inspection light circuit. It's worth noting the inspection light circuit does not have a fuse on it, so add one. In any case, let's go have a look back at the 6B again. Also, while I'm looking at the 4B, there is what people call the ARB style Bullbar, which is a much more sturdy one. These are the ones you want to look for on the 6B. They're a bit harder to find. On the 6B, this is the coat hanger style that people talk about. and they're a little flimsier, although I have managed to bend one, and I bent it far enough to make this wrinkle. I got to change that quarter panel. I got lucky enough to find one, so that can be an issue. A lot of people change headlights. A heads up, the headlights, the entire circuit load goes through the headlight switch. They don't have a relay in them. Adding relays in line is a great idea. It will get you some more brightness out of those lights straight away. But if you do want to put something fancy or bigger in there, absolutely add relays. You will burn out your headlight switch. In the 24 volt variants, there is this twin battery bay. I've got two 135 amp hour AGMs in there. They go pretty well, but this bit is usually susceptible to rust. Keep an eye on that, otherwise your batteries might fall out on the road. One of the biggest things to look with these is, while they have a galvanized chassis and predominantly aluminium bodies, the 6Bs have a fiberglass bonnet, not an aluminium one, but the firewall is steel. So the firewall is where you got to look for rust. On the 6Bs, you want to be looking for rust in the top and bottom of the doors, like some rust bubbling that I've got going on here. That's some stuff I need to fix. All in all, it's a personal decision as to whether you like these things. They are loud. On average, it's about 85 decibel in the cabin for me. I don't go much about 85 or 90 in these. The fuel economy gets to be pretty nasty. These have a 3.7 to 1 diff ratio. The 4Bs have a 3.5 to 1. 4Bs will do 100. Not necessarily the most sensible thing in my opinion. Other people have different opinions, of course, but in this thing, 80s where you get pretty good fuel economy. I'm only using about 28 to 30 litres to the 100k, but that ambulance module is heavy as hell. So the 4B is considerably lighter. It uses between about 12 and 15 litres to the 100k. Just an addendum about tyres. Tyres, I run tubes in these. You can run tubeless and you can change the rims and whatnot, but I do prefer having tubes and using truck tyres. Definitely need the extra weight rating, particularly on the 6B. All in all, I hope you found this useful, and if you do, if you're undecided on buying them, probably buy some shares in oil and grease companies. You're going to need it. But in any case, hope it was fun, and these things will make a mechanic out of you.